The silence had become Henry Colter's closest companion, wrapping around him like a shroud that both protected and suffocated. 3 years had passed since he'd spoken more than a handful of words to another human being. 3 years since the fever had taken his wife Catherine and their twin daughters in the space of 4 terrible days. His voice, when he occasionally heard it in dreams or caught himself muttering while working, sounded foreign to his own ears, rusty with disuse and hollow as wind through empty bones. His cabin sat in a valley so remote that most maps didn't acknowledge its existence, accessible only by a deer trail that wound through pine forests and over granite ridges that had never felt the bite of an axe or the weight of a wagon wheel. Henry had chosen this isolation deliberately, fleeing from a world that insisted on continuing its daily business while his own world had collapsed into ash and memory. Here, surrounded by peaks that scraped the belly of heaven and silence deep enough to drown in, he could exist without having to explain his grief to people who thought time should heal all wounds. The trading post he'd built sat empty now, its shelves bare of the goods that had once connected him to the broader territory. Trappers and prospectors had stopped coming when word spread that Henry Colter had lost his mind along with his family, that he'd become one of those mountain hermits who shot at strangers and talked to ghosts. He had done nothing to discourage such stories, finding them useful barriers against the well-meaning intrusions of people who thought human contact was medicine for every ailment. Henry spent his days in the mechanical routines of survival, chopping wood, checking snares, maintaining the small garden that kept him alive through the harsh mountain winters. His hands stayed busy, while his mind wandered through corridors of memory, reliving conversations with Catherine about the life they were building, remembering the sound of Lucy and Rose laughing as they played house with cornhusk dolls their mother had made. Sometimes the memories were so vivid, he would turn to share some observation or joke, only to find empty air where warm presence should have been. The morning that changed everything started like any other. Henry rose with the sun, built up his fire, and prepared the simple breakfast that had become his routine, cornbread and coffee that tasted like bitter comfort. He was sitting on his porch, watching steam rise from his cup into the crisp October air, when movement at the edge of the tree line caught his attention. For a moment his heart jumped with the old fear that someone had found his sanctuary, that the world was preparing once again to intrude on his carefully constructed solitude. But the figure that emerged from the shadows moved with a patience that spoke of respect rather than intrusion. A young native man, perhaps 25 years old, led a paint horse through the trees with the unhurried gait of someone who understood that sudden movements could be mistaken for threats. He was dressed in a mixture of traditional and traded clothing, buckskin leggings beneath a wool shirt, his long black hair braided with feathers and small bones that caught the morning light. Henry's hand moved instinctively to the rifle that leaned against the cabin wall, not from any immediate sense of danger, but from the habit of a man who had learned that isolation required constant vigilance. But something in the young man's manner made him pause. There was none of the tension that marked a warrior on a raid, none of the nervous energy that characterized someone with hostile intentions. Instead, there was a quality of careful observation, as if the visitor was reading signs that Henry couldn't perceive. The young man stopped perhaps 30 yards from the cabin and raised his right hand, palm forward, in the universal gesture of peaceful approach. When he spoke, his English was accented but clear, shaped by years of contact with traders and missionaries who had ventured into Crow territory. "Henry Colter," he said, his voice carrying easily across the distance between them. "I am called Swift Runner. I come with words from my people and with gift that has traveled far to reach this place." Henry felt his throat constrict with the effort of forming words after so many months of silence. When his voice finally came, it sounded like the croak of a raven, harsh and unfamiliar. Don't want company, don't want visitors, just want to be left alone." Swift Runner nodded as if this response was exactly what he had expected. Yes, this is what we have heard. White trader who speaks to no one, who turns away from path that connects all people. But sometimes, when man chooses silence too long, silence begins to choose him. Sometimes gift comes that cannot be refused, that carries medicine stronger than wish to be alone. This, the young crow warrior reached into a parfleche bag that hung from his saddle and withdrew something wrapped in soft deerskin. Even from a distance, Henry could see that whatever it contained was precious to its bearer. Swift Runner handled it with the careful reverence reserved for sacred objects or irreplaceable treasures. 3 summers ago, Swift Runner continued, settling cross-legged on the ground in a gesture that transformed confrontation into conversation. White trader came to our village near the Yellowstone. He was sick, burning with fever, speaking words in language we did not know. My grandmother, she is medicine woman. She says spirits tell her to help this man, to use old healing ways to draw poison from his blood. Henry felt something stir in his memory, a fragment of recollection that seemed important, though he couldn't immediately place why. He had been to Crow Country several times in the years before Catherine's death, trading for furs and horses, building the relationships that had made his isolated post profitable. There had been an incident involving fever, he remembered now, though the details remained frustratingly vague. This trader, Swift Runner went on, he was grateful for healing. When fever broke and strength returned, he gave my grandmother gift, picture made on metal that showed his family. Beautiful woman, 2 small girls who looked like flowers ready to bloom. He say this picture was most precious thing he owned, that it held souls of people he loved more than his own life. The breath left Henry's lungs in a rush that left him lightheaded, the daguerreotype. The precious image that had been his most treasured possession, the only visual record of Catherine and the twins that existed anywhere in the world. He had carried it everywhere, protected it like the relic it was, and then it was gone. Lost somewhere during those confused days when fever had made him delirious, when he'd stumbled through Crow territory, half out of his mind with sickness and desperation. "You have it," Henry whispered, his voice barely audible across the space between them. "The picture, you have my family's picture." Swift Runner carefully unwrapped the deerskin bundle, revealing the familiar brass frame that Henry had polished with obsessive care during their years together. The glass was intact, the image clear and undamaged, despite its journey through unknown hands and across impossible distances. Even from 30 yards away, Henry could see Catherine's gentle smile, could make out the serious expressions of Lucy and Rose as they stood beside their mother in the photographer's studio in Denver. "My grandmother, she keep this picture in medicine bundle for 3 years, Swift Runner explained. She say spirits tell her that someday picture must return to man who gave it. She say when right time comes she will know. When right person comes, picture will find its way home like bird that remembers nest." Henry stood slowly, his legs unsteady beneath him. The sight of that familiar image, so long lost and mourned, seemed to unlock something that had been frozen inside his chest for months. Tears he hadn't shed since the funeral began to stream down his face, cutting tracks through a beard that had grown wild with neglect. "Why now?" he managed to ask through the emotion that threatened to choke him. "Why bring it back now?" Swift Runner rose as well, holding the picture with the same careful reverence he had shown throughout their conversation. "Because grandmother had vision 3 nights ago. She see white man sitting alone in valley, talking to empty air, forgetting how to live with other people. She see picture calling to be reunited with man who gave it life through his love. She say silence can be medicine for wounded heart, but too much silence becomes poison that kills spirit along with pain." The young warrior took several steps closer, moving with the slow precision of someone approaching a wild animal that might bolt or attack without warning. "She send me to bring picture home, but also to bring message. She say man who could love family so much that he gave away most precious thing to show gratitude. Such man has too much good left in him to waste in loneliness. Henry found himself walking toward Swift Runner without conscious decision, drawn by the magnetic pull of the daguerreotype that contained the only faces he had loved more than life itself. His hands shook as he reached out to accept the gift, and when his fingers touched the familiar weight of the brass frame, he felt something crack open inside him that had been sealed shut for far too long. "They're beautiful," Swift Runner said softly, looking down at the image with genuine appreciation. "Your woman, she has eyes that see much kindness. Your little ones, they have faces full of questions about world they want to explore. No wonder you love them so much that losing them made words too heavy to carry." Henry clutched the picture to his chest, feeling warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the October sun. "Catherine," he whispered, speaking their names aloud for the first time since their burial. "Lucy. Rose. My God, I thought I'd never see them again." "Now you see them every day," Swift Runner observed. "But grandmother say, picture is not meant to be looked at alone. Love this deep. It is meant to be shared, to be remembered by others who can help carry weight of missing them. She say man who keeps such love to himself makes it smaller, but man who shares such love makes it grow larger than grief." The young crow warrior reached into his parfleche again and withdrew a smaller bundle, this one containing what looked like dried herbs and small carved bones. "Medicine for loneliness," he explained. "Not magic that brings back dead, but medicine that helps living remember how to live. Tea made from these herbs, it helps mind find peace. Bones carved with prayers, they help heart remember that love does not die when people die. It just changes form." Henry accepted the medicine bundle with hands that had forgotten how to receive gifts from other people. The herbs smelled of sage and sweetgrass, of mountain flowers, and something else he couldn't identify, but that seemed to carry the essence of growing things, of life persisting through seasons of death and rebirth. "I don't know how to thank you," Henry said, his voice growing stronger with use, "or your grandmother. This picture, it's everything to me, everything I had left of them." Grandmother say gratitude is shown not by words, but by living in way that honors gift," Swift Runner replied. "Picture came back to you because spirits say your story is not finished. Say there are people who need what you have to give, knowledge and kindness that dies with you if you choose to stay silent until death comes." As if summoned by their conversation, other sounds began to filter through the forest, the gentle lowing of cattle, the creak of wagon wheels, voices calling instructions in languages Henry recognized as those of travelers pushing livestock through difficult terrain. Swift Runner heard them too, his head tilting toward the sounds with the alertness of someone accustomed to reading the wilderness for signs of opportunity or danger. "Settlers," Swift Runner observed. "Maybe 20 families, with children and old ones. They have been traveling for many days, looking for place to winter before crossing high passes. The guide, he left them 2 days ago, took their money and disappeared in night like coward. Now they are lost, hungry, afraid they will not find shelter before snow comes." Henry felt something stir inside him that he hadn't experienced in years, the impulse to help, to use his knowledge and resources to ease someone else's suffering. His trading post was empty, but the building was sound and spacious enough to shelter multiple families. His knowledge of the territory could help them find safe passage come spring, and his connections with various tribes could provide protection during the dangerous months ahead. "You're asking me to help them," Henry said, understanding beginning to dawn. "That's why you came today, isn't it? Not just to return the picture, but to prepare me for what's coming." Swift Runner smiled, the first time his expression had shown anything other than serious concentration. "Grandmother say gifts always come with responsibility. Picture returns to show you that love survives, but also to remind you that love grows stronger when it serves others." These families, they need trader who knows mountains, who can speak with tribal leaders, who can help them survive winter and find safe passage in spring. The sound of the approaching wagon train grew louder, and through the trees Henry could now see glimpses of canvas covers and the heads of oxen plodding wearily up the narrow trail. There were indeed children among the travellers, their voices high and bright, despite what must have been weeks of difficult travel. He could hear a baby crying, the sound cutting through him like a blade made of memory and longing. "I haven't spoken to strangers in 3 years," Henry said, fear suddenly competing with the impulse to help. "I don't know if I remember how to be around people, how to be useful to anyone." "Grandmother say useful is not same as perfect," Swift Runner replied gently. "These people, they do not need man who has no scars, no losses, no understanding of pain. They need man who has survived terrible things and learned to keep living anyway. They need man who understands that helping others is medicine for empty heart." The first wagon came into view around the bend in the trail, and Henry could see the exhaustion written on the faces of people who had pushed themselves and their animals beyond safe limits. The man driving the lead wagon looked up at Henry's cabin with the desperate hope of someone who had been praying for exactly this kind of discovery. "Hello there," the man called out, his voice cracked with fatigue and relief. "Are you Henry Colter? We heard there might be a trading post in this area, someone who could help travelers find their way through the mountains." Henry looked down at the daguerreotype in his hands, at the faces of Catherine and the twins smiling up at him from their place beyond time and loss. He could almost hear Catherine's voice, could imagine what she would say about turning away families with children who needed shelter and guidance. She had always been the one who opened their door to strangers, who insisted that hospitality was a duty rather than a choice. "Yes," Henry called back, his voice carrying clearly for the first time in years. "I'm Henry Colter. Welcome to my trading post. Looks like you folks could use some rest and a warm meal." What followed was unlike anything Henry had experienced since before his family's death. His empty cabin filled with voices and movement as nearly 24 families settled in for what would become an extended stay. Children who reminded him of Lucy and Rose, in their curiosity and energy explored every corner of his domain, asking endless questions about mountain life and wilderness survival. The adults, exhausted by weeks of difficult travel and terrified by their guide's abandonment, looked to Henry with the kind of trust that both humbled and terrified him. They needed practical help, food, shelter, information about routes and weather. But they also needed the reassurance that came from being around someone who knew this country and could navigate its dangers. Henry found himself talking more in a single day than he had in the previous 3 years combined. He shared what he knew about mountain passes and seasonal weather patterns, about which tribes were friendly to travelers and which should be avoided. He helped organize sleeping arrangements and ration supplies, drew maps, and explained the timing necessary for safe spring travel. But the most healing conversations came in the evening, around fires that pushed back the darkness and created islands of warmth where stories could be shared. Henry found himself speaking about Catherine and the twins, describing their life together in ways that celebrated rather than mourned their memory. The words came hesitantly at first, rusty with disuse, but gradually flowing more freely as he rediscovered the comfort of shared experience. Other travelers shared their own losses, parents left behind, children who hadn't survived the journey, dreams that had died somewhere between the place they'd left and the place they hoped to reach. Henry realized that grief was a universal language, that his own experience of loss, rather than isolating him, actually connected him to the suffering and resilience of others. Swift Runner remained for several days, serving as translator and liaison as Henry worked to establish relationships with local tribal leaders. The young warrior's presence helped smooth negotiations that could have been difficult or dangerous, ensuring that the stranded families would have safe passage and protection during their winter stay. "Your grandmother was right," Henry told Swift Runner on the evening before the warrior's departure. This was medicine, not just the picture, but all of it. Remembering how to be useful to other people, how to use what I've learned to help instead of just survive. Swift Runner nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. Grandmother say love is like fire. If you keep it to yourself, it burns down to nothing. But if you share it, it spreads and grows and warms many people. Your love for family, it is still burning. Now it burns for others who need warmth. The winter that followed was unlike any Henry had experienced since Catherine's death. His cabin, which had been a tomb of silence for 3 years, became a community center where families gathered to share meals, tell stories, and plan for the future. Children filled spaces that had known only emptiness, their laughter echoing in corners where grief had once held absolute dominion. Henry taught the older children about trapping and tracking, showed the women how to preserve meat and prepare medicines from mountain plants. The men helped him repair and expand his facilities, building additional sleeping quarters and storage spaces that would serve future travelers who might find themselves stranded in his remote valley. Most importantly, he learned to speak about his family in ways that brought them into the present rather than burying them in the past. The daguerreotype found a place of honor on his mantelpiece, where it could be seen and admired by visitors who came to understand that love lost was not love wasted, that memory shared was stronger than memory hoarded. When spring came, and the families prepared to continue their journey to Oregon Territory, Henry faced a choice he hadn't expected. Several families invited him to join their group, to leave his mountain sanctuary and return to the world of cities and commerce. But he realized that his place was here, in this valley that had become a bridge between different worlds, a sanctuary for travelers and a meeting place for understanding. He continued to operate his trading post, but with a different purpose now. Instead of simply buying and selling goods, he became a facilitator of communication between native tribes and white settlers, helping both groups navigate the complex challenges of a changing frontier. His cabin remained open to travelers of all kinds, a place where people could find shelter, guidance, and the healing that came from shared stories and mutual support. The silence that had once been his closest companion was replaced by something richer, the comfortable quiet of a man at peace with his choices, punctuated by the sounds of community and connection. He still spoke to Catherine and the twins, but now their memory lived alongside the present rather than in place of it. Their love had not died with them. It had simply found new ways to manifest in the world they had left behind. Years later, when travelers asked him about the source of his contentment, Henry would point to the daguerreotype on his mantelpiece and tell them about a young Crow warrior who had brought him the most precious gift imaginable, not just the return of his family's image, but the reminder that love shared was love multiplied, that silence could be medicine, but isolation was poison, and that sometimes the most important conversations were the ones we thought we could no longer have.